morning. Well, thank you. Good morning. I hope for those of you that were in attendance yesterday that you found the day filled with new ideas and were able to meet some new contacts. And if today's your first day, welcome. My name is Dan Stein. I'm President and CEO of Second Harvest Food Bank of Southern Wisconsin and also Board Treasurer of Feeding Wisconsin. I hope you've enjoyed your breakfast and the time getting to know many people from different sectors than the one you work in. In 2010, when I was in my second year as CEO, one of my coworkers, Gina, who's probably in attendance someplace, told me that we should host a statewide conference on food share outreach. I didn't know any better, and she's quite persuasive, so I said yes. And that conference was the first Swipe Out Hunger Conference, I think was held in Stevens Point, and it was designed to promote the importance and best practices of food share outreach in our state. It was at that second year of that Swipe Out Hunger Conference that we first met David Lee, who at that time was Government Relations Director at Feeding America's national office. We had invited him to speak about the 2012 Farm Bill, which, as many of you might know, eventually became the 2014 Farm Bill. And when David became the Feeding Wisconsin Executive Directors, one of his first ideas was to restart the Swipe Out Hunger statewide conference, which until that time had gone dormant. And his idea for a statewide learning and networking event based on Swipe Out Hunger conference became the first Hunger and Health Summit in 2016. At the same time, and over those years, our food bank has always held a partner agency conference. This is a venue for food pantries across the 16 counties we serve in southwest Wisconsin. And it's designed to have them come together, network, and share best practices. And this year, our food bank decided to combine our partner agency conference with Feeding Wisconsin Hunger and Health Summit. Our sister food bank to the east, Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin, did the same with their inaugural partner agency conference. We chose to do this because this statewide conference brings together so many perspectives and connections with incredible hunger-fighting organizations and food pantries, advocates, and health organizations. Collaborating and not competing makes us much stronger when we work together and learn from each other. For me, this year's conference has special meaning. Some of you know that I've decided to retire at the end of this year. And to see our food bank's original statewide conference merge with our partner agency conference and to see so many people here makes me so proud. So now that I've gotten to know David a little bit over the last few years, nothing surprises me anymore. However, I'm told that if you're following the icebreakers on WOVA, you will learn that David thinks very deeply about the realistic causes of a potential zombie apocalypse. I apologize. I'm not even sure what that means, but nonetheless, would you please join me in welcoming David to the stage, who will introduce our morning panel.
Thank you so much, Dan. So, as many of you know who've been coming to this conference for a while, this morning breakfast panel is my favorite plenary session of the day because we are able to bring together so many fun folks to talk about an important topic. This year's conference, as you all know, is Growing Together on Common Ground, and it was picked by our conference planning committee because, like Dan said, this conference brings together such a diverse group of folks, and the perspectives that are shared are so wide and diverging. But it brings us together to figure out how we can come together to fight hunger, improve health, and strengthen communities. Our panel today represents some of Feeding Wisconsin's newest and closest partners and one old friend to discuss how they are working through a partnership to build strong and healthy communities and how they conceptualize how we can work together and grow our work together on common ground across sectoral silos. So this is what's going to happen. I'm going to introduce each panelist up to the stage. They're going to unmute their lavalier mics, and they are going to go through about a 3 to 5 minute introduction on the subject, and then we're going to go through some facilitated Q&A, and then at the end of the session, we will have a mic runner to run some audience Q&A with all of you. So first on our panel, I'm surprised that he made it because last night he was at a magnificent dinner that was being hosted by the Milwaukee Bucks for our food bank in eastern Wisconsin. Please welcome to the stage Arvind Gopal Ratnam. Next, next to the stage will be the CEO of United Healthcare's Community Health Plan, Ellen Sexton. And our last panelist is Jamie Sullivan, who is the head of corporate affairs and sustainability for Soylent. Okay, so 3 to 5 minutes introductory remarks on fighting hunger, improving health, and strengthening communities across silos. How we come together to do that work. I think we're going to go alphabetically. So Arvind.
Okay, we'll save the best for last. How about that? Good morning, everybody. My name is Arvind. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility for the Milwaukee Bucks. The first place Milwaukee Bucks. It's been a really, really exciting year for us. We've gone through a lot of change, both on and off the court, and so one of the newest and greatest partnerships that we have is with Feeding America, and so happy to talk a little bit about that. Listen, from our perspective, partnerships is core to everything we do. We believe in the power of partnerships. We believe in the power of collaboration. We honestly, the line that we oftentimes use, it takes a village. It takes a village to drive the change we want to see in our community, and that's our mentality all throughout our entire corporate culture. In fact, every single sponsor of ours, every single corporate partner of ours has some sort of community element towards their relationship with the Milwaukee Bucks, and that's a new part of our culture. If you're signing on to be a sponsor, if you want your logos placed, we're going to creatively think about a way that we're going to positively impact the community together too. And so partnerships is at the core of everything we do. And why hunger? I'll tell you a little bit about why hunger and why that's become more of a platform for us. Being in pro sports, we have a pretty transient population at times. With 15 players, 5 coaching staff, employees who come and go in pro sports. Traditionally, folks are there for a couple of years before they transition to other roles. So my mentality when we do community engagement is really truly to reflect the voice and the interests and the passions of our culture, of our people, of our employees. And so to be perfectly honest, one of the ways that we've started to connect with Feeding America is through our coach. As David alluded to last night, we did a dinner hosted by our coach, Coach Mike Budenholzer, to support Feeding America. Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin specifically. But it's part of his vision and his passion and his desire that we've made a part of our organizational focus to support hunger. And selfishly, it was probably one of the best things that's happened to me personally because I didn't realize how passionate I am about tackling some of our hunger challenges in our community. I'm a first-generation Indian American, born and raised here. My family's from India, very poor regions of India. And it really probably didn't hit me until within the last couple of years how much hunger influenced my family's growth growing up in India, how lucky I am to be where I am, but more importantly, the platform that not only I have, but the Milwaukee Bucks have, to use our microphone to bring more people to the conversation to ultimately drive positive change in our community. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here, appreciate the opportunity to learn from some of our colleagues up here. But I want to say the Milwaukee Bucks are here to not only stay, but more importantly, we're here to continue to drive change collectively with our partners across the community.
Thank you so much, Arvind.
Ellen.
Good morning. I'm Ellen Sexton. I am the CEO for United Healthcare Community Plan of Wisconsin, and I did get to enjoy that dinner last night. He's right, it was fabulous. It was great. And to see somebody 7 foot tall pouring wine is something to be seen, and they did a fabulous job. The guys were great. So as CEO of United Healthcare Community Plan of Wisconsin, I, along with my colleagues, we serve 180,000 Medicaid beneficiaries across the state. And so what does that mean? You may be thinking about it in, oh, you must work with providers, you know, you've got to negotiate with the state, but it's really much more than that. For our most complex members, there's medical, there's behavioral, and there's social determinants of health, right? So that's housing, that's hunger, that's do they have a job? Do they have transportation? And all these things matter because 20% of your health is actually outside the doctor's office. You think about that. And so the first thing I want to say is thank you to all of you because you guys are vital to us. Your food pantries, your food banks, that's a difference maker in the lives of our members. We were just talking in a staff meeting a few weeks ago, and Kathy Schoenauer came in and said, wow, we have a member, she's on bed rest, she has 2 other kids, and she's struggling to get food in her house because her refrigerator's out. And do you know where Kathy already was? She wasn't saying, well, what should we do? She'd already picked out the make and model of a refrigerator, wasn't asking me, is that okay? She's empowered to go and do that. So that's the kinds of things that we're talking about every day with our members. We have case managers, we have member advocates, and they're asking them that question. Have you eaten today? Do you have stable housing? Those are the things that actually impact people's health just as much as what's going on in the doctor's office and are they treating their diabetes. You can't focus on your health if you're wondering where your next meal is or where you're gonna live, where you're gonna stay. And so I love my job for so many reasons, but one of them is the impact we get to make on people's lives.
That's great.
Awesome.
Thank you. Now this works. Thank you so much, Ellen. Jamie?
So what an honor to be on stage with you guys. But I have to ask, am I the old friend? I've like never been the old friend.
You are
at
the old
any
friend.
panel that I've ever, can you guys hear me? Like never been the old friend. I've always been the kid at the table. So that's like, I feel like I'm a grown up, which is
We've
great.
known each other for a couple years, for more than a couple
like,
years now.
Like 10 probably. But so I talked a little bit yesterday about why hunger, and I talked at a session yesterday. So like raise your hand if you're done hearing me talk. You're like, yeah, me, for sure me. But so I'm gonna pivot a little actually and talk for a moment about CSR and kind of, I was in the food banking side of reaching out and fundraising from people.
Can you just say what CSR stands for?
Yeah, corporate social responsibility, which is just the fancy way of saying when companies give you money to do your work, they call it CSR, we call it fundraising, and by we, I mean food bankers. I say we, and I say we. So, because they've been on both sides of the table, but a lot of people ask me what makes a good CSR partner. We all have more to offer than money. We all have more to offer than money. And if you're not leveraging your corporate partners and your board members for policy work, for their partnerships, for their resources beyond just money, you're not maximizing that. I also think about companies that people are always like, who is the perfect partner for a food bank, right? We have a lot of food companies that work in this. We have a lot of healthcare. We have a lot of local. I like to think about a good partner and CSR in terms of debits and credits, right? And so we all know companies that are out there, food companies, that have spent their life cycle of their company digging a hole, meaning they might have made products that caused problems with obesity, right? They might have created issues with diabetes. And now they're digging themselves out of that hole, right? They're trying to they're building their CSR programs to kind of neutralize that debit, right? There's a lot of companies, though, out there that are starting from flat ground and are building credits, right? It's not this neutralizing, which when you're in a situation of a partnership with this credit debit system, you have a lot more freedom to ask of people when they're building up, out, like positive and not just neutral. I don't know if that makes sense, but when people ask me about who are the best partners, I always say go for the ones that aren't digging out of a hole and start with the ones that are just building credits. And so it's a different way to think about things. At Soylent, I'm really lucky to be at a company that was mission focused from birth, and we're proud to say we're not digging ourselves out of a hole. We believe in complete nutrition for the masses that are affordable and accessible. But I'm not just saying for Soylent. There's a lot of companies out there that it has been their mission from the beginning to give back, and those are the ones that make the best CSR partners.
So Jamie, you sort of stole my lunch money on the
Sorry.
spicy question that we had queued up for all of you. But we will get there.
didn't
We will get there.
Prep. Sorry.
Actually, why don't we go there now, right? I mean, given that we've started, I think you said it pretty well, right? That in some ways CSR programs for folks can be sort of seen as issue, like sort of image management, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you spoke a little bit about how you bring authenticity to your work, or how you think through it. Ellen, how does a company like United Healthcare do the same?
Yeah, I mean, so I talked a little bit about, right, for us, first it's about our member. And so I think with the mission that United Healthcare has, helping people live healthier lives, it goes hand in hand. But if you think about the bigger question and you say, okay, why is the company maybe sponsoring, or why are they doing this? I think you have to step back and say, well, what else is it about it? And I was glad you said it's not always just the money, right? I get a lot of calls, and what I like to hear is, what are their ideas? How do they want to involve us in it? What do we actually get to do as part of it? Like, how do we get involved? So, for instance, Erin Becker is here. We work with Feeding Wisconsin, and for a month she spent a project working on SNAP to make it better and thinking about the capacity of it. So I think what I look for a lot in partners are people that aren't just coming for the funding part of it, but actually coming with ideas of how you're going to solve something and how we're going to work together. And just like healthcare, it can't be episodic. It's got to be an enduring and something that goes on, because it takes time to collaborate and to work and to create something. And so if it's just sort of like a one and done type thing, that doesn't help anybody. It's really got to be something that you've thought through. You're working towards a common goal. And so I think for many, when you step back and you see companies that are approaching sponsorships like that, that's way different than, hey, can I sponsor one dinner, or can I, just do one conference? This is our daily work, and so I think when it starts to be a part of your fabric and a part of your company's DNA, it just comes naturally then.
That's great. Thank you.
From my perspective, a lot of it comes down to relationship. Do you want to build a relationship with me? Do you want to build a relationship with my organization? If it's largely going to be a transactional discussion, we can go that route, but I'm going to lean more towards partners that want to grow and develop a sustainable relationship with us. And so sustainability is huge. It's not only just in the relationship side, but it's in the measurement of the programmatic side. It's also just the ability to kind of see forward thinking down the line, and it ultimately, back to Jamie's point of organizations that are digging out versus that are kind of already growing, we do prioritize organizations that can think 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 years down the line, because we want to grow with you. So that's a huge focus area for us. I think part of it's also largely dictated on the passion of our people. And what differentiates us, we try to mobilize our employees now as much as we possibly can. We've developed an employee volunteering program. We incentivize employees to be out in the community. We give them paid time off to go and volunteer, identify organizations, causes, issues that they're interested in, and then we align them into the right organizations to support in the community. So ultimately, for me, it always comes back down to relationships. Are you going to reach out to me more than just as a checkbook? Because while many of my players and our owners and coaches have money, that doesn't always translate down to the CSR department or the foundation. We're just like any other group trying to raise money, trying to find ways to support. And so we want it relationship-based. We don't want it transactional. So that's a huge thing for us. And I don't know if that's, hopefully that's not completely foreign, but that's the mentality that we take. That's the prioritization that we focus on, because we want to be passionate about everything we do. Because we do try and evaluate year over year, what's working well, what are the groups that we're working with that are coming to us more than just as a transactional group, but that's thinking creatively about how to engage and grow together.
So a lot of the folks in this room may, I guess, maybe a little bit shy in reaching out, right? Like you're saying, hey, we want to build relationships, and that takes time, it takes investment. At what level does that seem right or appropriate to all of you?
Are we going down the line again?
We can,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Or whoever wants to take a first stab at that.
I guess, again, I can speak from being on the fundraising
Right.
side, right? And I, like, people at foundations and at organizations would always joke that, like, every fundraiser is every foundation head's best friend because you, like, have to be friends with people that are funding you. But I think that I realized the success on the fundraising side came from authenticity and authentic relationships and just building connections with humans that you have something in common with. And I had the most success in fundraising at the food bank when I could build relationships with people that were willing to like dig a little deeper. I did a lot of work in SNAP and people that wanted to talk about not just like SNAP, but like how it benefits business and like go a little deeper and the economic impact. And then on this side of the table, I have people reaching out all the time for money and for resources, but like, let's just have coffee and be friends goes a really long way because the organization, I mean, it's like, right, we've known each other for 10 years and we are genuinely friends. And so when David calls and asks, I say yes, because I know whatever he's doing is worth our time and money. And it's true, and I think that has taken, I probably would have done it 5 years ago too, but at that point we were both fundraising. But like it takes years, and I don't mean that lightly. And for a small food company, we don't have deep pockets, and so how we utilize our resources have to be very strategic. And the people that I trust the most are where that is going to go. Although I will say in the last 6 months, I've brought on some really great partners that I did not know 6 months ago, but we have become friends. These are people that I get coffee with, get drinks with, learn from, grow with, and I can like hit them up to say like, hey, someone else is doing this thing. What do you think about that? And like, do you know them? They're in the college hunger space too. Have you heard of them? Like those kinds of back and forth relationships that are not just, here's your RFP, here's your proposal, submit the button, let's send the check kind of relationships are really important to me.
Can I echo that? I think that's critical. I'm relatively new to the foundation role that I have, so it is about meeting people. It is about wanting to get to know people from my perspective. I think the thing that, I don't want to say rubs me the wrong way, but because I can appreciate it and I do it, but getting asked for money on the first interaction, I can appreciate that that's what your jobs are and that's what our jobs are. It's not the approach and style that I go by. And maybe I'm unique in that perspective, and yes, there isn't necessarily enough hours in the day to have coffee with everybody, but we truly want to try. I truly want to try. I want my team to do that too. So I think it's try and get to know us first, get to know me first, and that's how we look at it from the Bucks perspective. Because there's a lot more assets we can bring to the table at times, our organization, our partners can bring to the time to support the ultimate ask. But if we can't talk and develop a relationship we're maybe not ever going to get to that point. And so I think it's almost like let's start dating first, and before we start exchanging rings, maybe.
Yeah.
It's like bachelor nonprofit, right?
A little bit, yeah.
I look for the ideas, I think. I mean, and maybe that's the relationship for me, is like, that's what gets me excited and wanting to work with another organization, is how are they going to approach things differently? How are they going to look at things differently? How we work together. And so many times you get the phone call or the email, and then you reach back out and you ask some more questions, and you realize it maybe was just about the money, and it's like, well, that's not dating. That's kind of boring, right? So, something a little bit more in depth is what I'm always looking for.
Can I have a quick follow-up? Because I know that there's a lot of people that want to learn about grant writing and what makes a great grant. And I will tell you that grants, the writing of them does not matter nearly as much when you have the relationship, right? Like, I don't care if you use the right grammar when you send a proposal. I was a fundraiser, so I don't make people submit formal proposals, but I don't care about what your words on paper say. If I know you and we have a relationship and I know your idea is great and you're committed for the long haul. So like, I think we get in the nonprofit space really hung up on grant writing, because there are very formal foundations in all of our communities that require that submission, but even those formal foundations have human beings reading those grants, right? And even in an age of technology, there's not some computer that's reading that at this point, right? And so don't get hung up in is the language perfect? Don't get hung up in the copy editing of a grant when picking up the phone or having coffee will erase any grammatical error that you could ever make. And even if your idea is not 100% clear in writing, if I can be like, let's get coffee so I understand what you're trying to accomplish with this, it's going to go so much further.
I agree, and still, for my team, write excellent grants. Can we get the microphone moving around so we can get the audience in for some questions? But in the meantime, I wanted to, so we've been promoting this Whova, right? And so I wanted to sort of bring that back in. And Jamie had posted an interesting question to the Whova that up until a couple days ago had no answers to it, no conversation on it, which was, what's the food industry's role in fighting food insecurity? And recently there were two brave folks who submitted some comments, and it was all about food waste. So do you have any other thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I'm at the risk of being harsh. We, meaning folks fighting hunger, have to demand more than food companies not giving us trash. And I appreciate the food waste comment, because I know you're getting trash, meaning I've seen great food donations and I've seen garbage food donations. But if that's the thing that we're talking about on how we get the food industry involved, I'm worried we're missing the boat. And I mean that because food companies have a lot of money that can be made by generating economic activity, and those are making sure that your clients aren't standing in your lines a year from now. And that's making sure that your clients have access to SNAP that is purchasing their products in their grocery stores. So if we're focused on the rotten vegetables that are coming and the process to get the rotten vegetables sorted, while I know in the immediate that is so critical, and I know that there's tons of people working on that, but if that's what we're asking of the food industry, we're missing a huge opportunity. My organization is made up of like a bunch of 20-somethings that lived in Silicon Valley, and they care about SNAP. And I mean that because they care about making money. And so I think, and so people, when I came on board, were talking about SNAP and talking about, in California we call it CalFresh, and these light bulbs were going off. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was in SNAP outreach for a long time, so I was like, oh, I can angle this. And but like they actually care about making sure that people access it, and they're willing to talk about it. We're getting ready to do a SNAP challenge with our entire leadership team and a bunch of food tech startups in Silicon Valley and Los Angeles to talk about SNAP on a much larger level. And these are people that I worry that food bankers and pantry folks are only asking them to reduce their food waste. And so I just want to like push you to go that next step and figure out what makes economic sense in the whole kind of ecosystem of food industry, and also pushing them to develop products on the front end that reduced waste and reduce supply chain length of time and transparency, so that that is not an issue for you guys on this end. So again, for the folks that were brave enough to step up, I so appreciate that comment and have been in your shoes, but I just want to encourage us all to think a little bit deeper and push a little bit harder about what we can encourage from the food industry.
I love that we had somebody from the food industry say that. But anyways, any questions from the floor? Please raise your hand. And
Hello. I love the concept of the CSR. It's not something I was aware of before. I've never worked in the corporate world. How do we identify a company that has that philosophy or has people on board that we can approach, and how do we identify them?
Like, how do you find companies? Well, here's one. I think it goes through different avenues. I think, right, there's grant possibilities. I think you can see with different companies how they might do different sponsorships. But honestly, it's all out there on the web. And I think what I would do if I were you, and wherever you're kind of in, is, who's a company that, one, has a mission that matches closely to your mission and or what you're trying to do. And also be open, though, to think about people you may not have ever thought about, right? So United Healthcare, right, we're in housing, right? Most of you wouldn't think about us being in housing, but we just, through tax credits, we just completed a housing project in Madison, and we'll be finishing one in Walker's Point in a few weeks. So I would watch press releases, I would go out on the web, I would think about, what is it you're trying to do? And what I find is you tend to start to see the same people when you go to different events and things, and those are the people that you probably want to work with.
I would also say that it's kind of like befriending a politician before they get elected. Look at companies who are hiring CSR positions on LinkedIn. So just look up corporate social responsibility roles and see who those companies are, because that's either someone that's been doing it or about to be doing it, and if you can get in with them while they're hiring, then you're in, right? And also, for all of you food bank folks that are helping your staff grow and learn and develop into their next careers, encourage your staff that might be ready for the next step to apply for those roles, because if you have food bankers on the inside, you get more money.
I echo a lot of that. I think the other thing that your question raised for me was maybe we all need to do a little bit better job of storytelling what we're doing as well. Because, and I don't want to lose sight of the importance that I think all of us here in the room have of increasing our voice and telling our stories and using the power of our people and our employees to tell more positive stories. Because I think the more visibility that exists promoting the work that corporations and nonprofits are doing, I think the more visible and more just easier and accessible people become. I think that's one of the best things that we do from the Milwaukee Bucks perspective is we use our microphone. And that's a concerted effort to where we can use our platform to bring people together. Not to jump around, but one of the things that we prioritize, and I prioritize with our team when we look at grant applications or who are we going to work with, is who are you also working with? All too often, too much of our community just still operates in silos. It's, okay, I want to do X, Y, and Z. I don't see somebody doing it the way I want to do it, so I'm going to start up my own nonprofit, or I'm going to start up my own new group, and then we continue to perpetuate the silos that exist. So I ask us to think about not only how do we story tell together, but then how do we also just continue to ask upon each other to help ourselves with our programs, our projects, our initiatives, because I personally prioritize that. I want to know if you're working with other people, are you going to use your microphone? Are you going to use your own social outlets or whatever your people to tell your story? And I think that's another critical way to gain access to potential donors and funders and other people that can be supportive.
So, thank you. So Jamie sort of like tossed a grenade out in the room that I wanted to sort of repack a little bit for everybody on the panel, right? Because we sort of heard Jamie's perspective, and I want to loop back to you at the end, because I'm curious, right? I think some of the folks in the room might sort of have some feelings about that are conflicted, and maybe some agree, maybe some vehemently disagree, and that's okay for us to have sort of a platform for us to have these wide-ranging, diverse conversations. But as funders, right, as partners, what happens when a partner comes to you and says, you could be doing better, right? How do you all have that conversation in a way that isn't like, you know, or how do you as funders sort of take that feedback in, and how do we sort of, again, sort of grow together, right, in these conversations?
First, I listen. I want to understand, well, what is it that they're seeing? Is it how we're working with them? Is it because they, and this happens all the time, they see us give to someone else, and why didn't we select them? And so you have to listen to that and take it in and absorb it and think about your organization, and was there something we missed? Was there something we should have done differently? But it is complicated, right? And it's complicated too. I won't even begin to try and explain United Healthcare as an organization of 200,000 people. And so many times, not only do I have the opportunity of being able to help organizations, but I also have internally different agendas from our own corporate social responsibility about things that they want to work on. So they may come and say, well, we want to work in social isolation in Wisconsin, when I really wanted to work on housing. And so you have a different agenda that also can come from your internal. And so, I mean, the first thing I would also, that I normally also say is don't take anything personal, right? And keep coming back, because guess what? Next year, I may not have to be looking for things in a social isolation type of a tranche. It could be more in, food insecurity. And so I think it's easy to be critical, but if you learn from it and you do something with it, that's really the difference. But I would caution people to not always think, well, it's exactly as it seems, because there's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Well, from my side, I view it as a two-way street. I am more than willing, and I expect partners to say, like, hey, you guys can do more. That's great. But then if I come back to you and say, give me some specifics, I want to hear some specifics. So I expect it to be a two-way street. And we firmly believe in continuous development and growth. But again, it has to be in the form of a productive relationship and partnership with the mindset of growth. So that's I guess, the most important way I look at it. It also depends on who's asking me, or what is being asked of me. If it's a partner that's saying, you can do better, you should support X, Y, and Z, I want it to be alignment with what our priorities are as an organization. I think, and I know you guys understand this, but I think the most important thing a lot of people need to remember is there's only so much capacity that we all have too as leaders within our organization. We have set priorities. Part of that is hunger relief and hunger awareness and fighting that, and that's one of the things that we all prioritize, but there are millions of other initiatives and programs and focuses that we can't prioritize and support. So I think part of it is an acceptance and understanding. Part of it's also a willingness to have a conversation that if you want to provide direct feedback, like, let's get better, let's have a productive conversation on how we can do that together. Those are things that we consider when we're doing that too.
My turn again?
No, we're
You're
going to
like,
go to
no,
the audience, because I see a hand all the way back, and then we're going to come back around through these tables. I do have a follow-up for you, though, a little later.
Off the record? No, just
No,
kidding.
no. Nope. If we have time.
Thank you. Thank you for this conversation. I really appreciate your commitment to longstanding and deep partnerships. And my question is, just thinking about all of the great organizations around the state that are doing such important work, and just wondering, how do you make that access to partnership with you equitable? And as opposed to, say, the people you already know and the people they know. How do you make that kind of an equitable relationship building process? Thank you.
That's a great question.
I guess I can answer from my perspective. It has to be so deliberate. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about how I make sure that it's not just my friends and community that I'm working with. A little context, Soylent is located in downtown LA, just a few blocks from Skid Row, and when I came to Soylent, I had to figure out how to logically do that right and be a part of a community that I wasn't before a part of. And even though I've worked in hunger relief for a long time, that level of homelessness and extreme poverty is something that I wasn't accustomed to. And so the first thing that I did was just start talking to people. I walked through Skid Row and talked to residents and talked to people that were working at organizations and kind of just understood who the community leaders were, and then had them tell me who I needed to have the next conversations with. And then I also did some internal education about who those folks are and talked to our team and tried to find out what they were interested in. And we are really lucky to have a pretty diverse team, but then I looked at organizations that were working on diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of in tech leadership, and really was intentional about trying to open those gates and get kind of our information about grants out. I go to lots of events and literally just try to get the information out. I know and I'm aware that my privilege is a barrier to a lot of people accessing our resources, and it's something that every day is something that is top of mind for me. And it's something that I think we all have to be very conscious of, and I'm not saying I'm doing it perfectly, but it is a really conscious daily decision for me and for our organization to be authentically engaged with organizations that aren't in my immediate circle.
Yeah, please.
I don't know if this is the wrong thing to say, but I'll be honest, not every relationship is equitable. You're not going to have the same, at least my mindset is you're not going to have the same relationship with everybody. You can try, you can have the same approach, you can have the same mentality, you can approach the relationship the same way with everybody, but every relationship is different. But I think as much as you can maintain consistency with the respect and the commitment that you demonstrate and grow with those partner organizations, I think that's the best you can do. I think it's unrealistic to have the same expectation or relationship with everybody. Funding dictates certain types of relationships. Passion of your employees or we personally dictate certain levels of which we're going to engage more or demonstrate maybe more preferential treatment to others. Even more specific, if this wasn't David Lee asking to come and be part of this Feeding Wisconsin event, I don't know if I would have made the prioritization to be here, but it's because I'm incredibly passionate about the work that's being done by the people in this room and what our relationship is. Organizations prioritize a little bit differently. Now, again, it ultimately still comes down to can you be respectful and to everybody and that is your partner, how do you treat everybody the same way, how do you give a time of day to everybody? But I do think it's honestly unrealistic to think that you can treat everybody the exact same way because every relationship's different.
I may be taking your question even more differently from the aspect, and I think as I was listening to Jamie, right, to me it's about getting out and understanding what's the problem we're trying to solve. And so, you think about ending hunger, and you think about Milwaukee or you think about urban, and then you go rural, and it's a completely different problem and issue that you're solving. And so I think that's where I think about the disparity and the equity. How do you make sure you're solving the problem in the right way and working with the right people? And I think that's how sometimes maybe it comes out that it isn't equitable, but because you're working with different partners in different ways. But I think if you just take it back to what are you trying to solve for, but you have to get out, and that's what I was listening. You have to go experience it and see it because it's going to be different, and so then there's going to be a different way that you tackle the solution.
That's great. I think, Mike's right there.
Hello, good morning. Raina Andrews
morning.
with Feeding America, Eastern Wisconsin. Arvind and Ellen, thank you so much for your continued support of our work in Eastern Wisconsin, providing access, removing barriers to healthy and safe food. So this conversation is so inspiring, specifically what you've said, Jamie, in terms of being bold in pushing back and not settling in the context of food waste. So my question for all three of you as being philanthropists and being contributors financially and in kind to our community, with your power in your platform, what is your position on bringing together some of these nonprofit silos in the food, health, housing, and employment spaces?
That's a great follow-up.
This is a great question. Because I don't specifically work in Wisconsin, I'll be brief and let your local folks kind of take it. But I think that is one of the things that, having been on the nonprofit side and now being where I am, that I most value about my role now, because funders have a huge amount of power to bring people together. I remember when a foundation funder would be like, show up here, you're like, okay, I will be there. But I think that it is your role, our role in the hunger relief community to ask them to do that. Because I do have people, one partner in particular, I don't know if you guys know the organization Swipe Out Hunger that works with college students, led by Rachel Sumac. She's this young, brilliant leader who is always asking me to pull people together for her. And she does that in a really intentional way. She has mapped who she needs to get her work done. And she's like, I need 2 representatives from UCLA, I need someone from college dining services, I need a food bank rep, and I need 3 people from the food industry. Jamie, figure it out. And I will say, okay, because I need to talk to those people too, because my goal is her goal. But unless I have so many other hats that I'm wearing throughout the day, unless she explicitly says to me, these are the 8 partners that I need to have a conversation with, can you pull them together? I don't think about that. And so I think as we talk about cross-sector partnerships and removing silos, that is where we can be really influential. And I really hate to put the onus back on this room because you're doing so much. But even if you just before the end of the day, brainstorm, man, if we had people from these 3 things, we can pull a lever and change the game for this community. Put it together and send that email today and ask your funder to see if they would be willing to do it. Because on the corporate side, another part of corporate or social responsibility that we don't love to talk about is PR, right? And that's great PR. That's fabulous PR. You can invite press to that stuff, right? So no matter the level of who you're working with, those short, here's the 10 people that can change the game, will you do it? Will Soylent host it? Yes, always yes.
Don't settle. Don't settle ever, I guess. And that seems so simple, but it's the truth of the matter. And so, I think we have to think about the swimming pool and take all those lanes out. Let's all jump in together. And whether it's housing, whether it's social isolation, whether it's disabilities, right? We want everybody to be part of that. And so, just one example, right? And I mentioned, you probably don't know we're in housing, right? So we have a pilot, My Connections pilot, and we're looking at 10 of our members that are the most social, high complexity from medical, behavioral, and we're actually paying for their rent, right? And so that's not in my state contract, and it's not actually something that somebody from corporate asked us to do. In fact, they told me, sorry, we can't sponsor yours because you're too small of a market. And I said, well, we're going to do it anyway. And now, and now we're an example market for it. And we've been doing it for the last 6 months. And the reason why, right, is the impact we're making on these members' lives, but they have a 60% reduction in emergency department visits. They have a 60% reduction in inpatient. So when you were talking before and you were kind of challenging food companies to do bigger things, that's what we got to challenge each other to do, is like think about it differently. But you see the connection, right? We're paying for housing, but we did impact the health part of it too. But that's not even the greatest part of it for me. Is one of our members is now reconnected with his mother that he hasn't talked to in 7 years. One of our members is going back to school. One of our members is going and getting a job. So she's not even going to be our member, right? And so if you think about the trajectory, right, I'm helping members not be our members anymore. Well, gosh, you know, my boss would say, are you crazy, Ellen? Which she does say a lot. But that's the point, right? You're trying to solve the problem, and the rest of it then kind of naturally comes together. So right, don't settle, and think about how you can participate in maybe a different way than you never ever thought about.
Yeah, for us, it's a little bit of cultural, attitudinal focus and prioritization. We prioritize grant applications where multiple parties are working together. We prioritize funding organizations that say they are working with other people. So from our perspective, right, directly there, it's part of our ask upon you is to continue to always think about who else can you work with within the community, or who else are you already working with. And then from our side, it's continuing to maintain and continue that focus of pushing that mantra, that message of convening and collaboration, and making sure that the funding community that we support understands that we want to give to those who are working with others. And the more we can continue to push that message, that passion, that drive, I think ultimately both of our sides of the equation ultimately continue to evolve that way.
That's great. You know, I think if there's any subtext to this panel is that the folks in this room are incredibly powerful, right? We oftentimes just don't ask the questions, or we don't ask our partners to do just that little bit more. Might not be a mile more, might be like 100 yards more, right? So if there's any subtext, ask. Any question? I thought we had another hand coming, or if not, oh, right here.
Well, the good news is that my answer has kind of been, my question has been answered. But I do have something else that I wanted to ask is, what about, like we talk about the homeless people and things like that, but a new area is with the government, when the government shut down. Is there any way or any suggestions to reach out to them? Because I'm noticing that there might be like, I don't know, is there anything out there for helping, like, when or if that ever were to happen again? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so are you subscribed to our newsletter? Because if you are, you can learn about the policy issues that are coming up in DC that we need people's help with, because remember, your elected officials represent you, and they are, the best way I've always described it is that they are the customer service representative for you, right? So if there's something wrong in your backyard, you gotta call them, and you gotta let them know. And when the government shutdown happens, or I hope it doesn't happen again, but you know, we had folks calling their members of Congress to say, hey, you know, this is how it's affecting me. Or when the Farm Bill was happening, we had folks calling their members of Congress, telling them about how the Farm Bill was gonna affect them and their food share benefits. So go to our website, www.feedingwi.org, to sign up for our newsletter, because that is a core part of our work. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Gunlock with Second Harvest Food Bank of Southern Wisconsin. It's been really interesting to hear from all of you this morning, and I loved hearing the word storytelling. And I was just wondering if there is a story, maybe even from last night, that really resonated with any of you that encourages you, inspires you to continue supporting our food insecurity work.
Yeah, actually there is one for me. Sorry if this is on. So, a little bit of backstory. I don't know if you heard the story at all last night, but our coach, this is his second head coaching position. He was previously in Atlanta. Prior to that, he was with the San Antonio Spurs and won a bunch of championships. He started there as a video coordinator. Prior to that, he attempted to play professional basketball in Denmark. Well, one of the guests at the dinner last night was, apparently when you go to play in Denmark, and if you're an American, traditionally families adopt you, and that you are there to get better acclimated to the community there. So Coach Bud has been in touch with this family that adopted him when he was a professional decades ago. And that family was there last night to support not only Coach Bud, but interestingly enough, to me, when I was talking to them, hunger is an incredible passion and challenge for them in their community in Denmark too. And it resonated with me just because it reminded me that we have so much work to do. And the challenges that we have are more than just what we have here locally, but we can make an impact locally. And I just hearing from people who came from halfway around the world to say there needs to be more stuff like last night to bring people who don't really know about all the challenges that are facing our community together to hear about that. Just it was refreshing, and I appreciated hearing that from an outsider's perspective, that there is a lot of good work going on, whether it's an event like last night or what we're doing here today or all the wonderful things you guys do throughout the years. There's a lot of good things going on, and I think we need to shout a little bit more about all the great things that are going on, because the more we can talk positively about the good things, the more people in society gravitate towards that and want to support that. So that's why we truly believe in storytelling the positive around the work that we're trying to do in the community, the work our partners are doing in the community, because even if it influences one more person to join the mission, support the initiative, support the cause, then we feel like we're using our platform the right way beyond just financial support.
I didn't hear that story. That's a good one. Storytelling, I think, and I mean, right, your question for us a little bit was, as companies, does it look like you're doing something for a different reason? And so I think sometimes we can get a little bashful maybe in telling our stories. And so I think hearing from you even today and listening and thinking about it, that is important, right? Because it does raise awareness. And so just reminding ourselves, let's tell these good stories. Let's not be bashful about them, and let's share that, because I think one of the greatest things too, when we were talking about partnerships and relationships, sometimes you may come to any one of us, but it doesn't end up being that you work with us, but we maybe connect you with somebody else. And so I think the more we raise that awareness and do the storytelling, I think does help. So.
My story from last night was that I got a text from the director of development of the food bank saying that Brooke Splash Mountain Lopez had poured his wine. That was my story from last night, while I was here. So another question from the, yes, Kelly. It's coming to you.
So what we're talking about is building resilient communities, essentially. And there are places in the country that have really made headway as far as connecting resources to people that need them. King County in Washington, Tennessee has a really good program going to create resilient communities. Is that something that your agencies, your companies have in the forefront of their mind? I mean, we are essentially, when I was working with Badger Care, we want to work ourselves out of a job, like you said. And the other part of building resilient communities is mental health care. For every dollar spent on mental health care, $4 are saved by the health plan. when can mental health care become the primary issue? If we can't start getting together as communities to create more resilient people, we're never going to create more resilient communities. You know what I'm saying? It'd just be interesting to hear what your thoughts are on that.
So I think because of the mic, the question was, is building resilient communities sort of in the forefront of these companies' minds and partnership strategies?
Start? I feel like from a healthcare perspective.
I don't know. I think I'm still on.
Are you
I don't
good?
think
Okay.
I need it.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, right. So I have counterparts in Washington and Tennessee that, you know, I talk to all the time about what it is that they're doing. You also have to have the community be receptive to it, right? So that's a piece of it. Amazingly enough, technology is a big part of it. Data sharing and actually being aware of the closed loop concept of things. So they went to a food bank, that gets logged, then it gets shared back with their case manager. Their housing is a big part of it from the perspective of that connectivity. And so data sharing is interesting because there's different opinions on that, of course, too. Like, can it be shared as readily? And providers are always like, well, this takes extra time, but all those extra time things and the sharing of data is actually going to help because what you're talking about also is the funding part of it. And so the more that we get the concept of braided funding and that the funding doesn't have to be in silos. So some of the reasons, right, we all work in silos is because of how the funding is. And so if we start to smooth that out, and the data sharing will actually help that to prove, like, right across the spectrum, if you're working food, if you're working housing, if you're working health, that you can actually save money, then that will follow. So I think that's a big part of it in doing pilots where you start to braid that funding and you start to actually share the data and share the outcomes is a big piece of it. Your second question around behavioral health is right on, right? And I think we're catching up as a society to a certain extent, and right, look across the room, 1 in 5 people have some sort of behavioral health component, and so that's a huge number, and so as we look at a person, right, it's everything, the medical, the behavioral, the social, so there isn't a differentiation of it. But I also think what's interesting in the behavioral health space is we're still learning so much about it and about what effective treatments are, and so there's the recognition that to treat a whole person, that is part of it, but there's also how do we get down the spectrum of treating it? And you think about medical necessity and things like that. Well, somebody that's broken a leg, it's a lot more straightforward. The behavioral health is just a whole different kind of complex piece of it. So hopefully that kind of answered or just shared kind of your sentiment that it's hard, and those are the things that we have to get at. We have to get at the community, we have to get at behavioral health.
That's great. Anybody want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I'd say the only thing I'd echo with that is the holistic community mindset, or how do we address the overall ecosystem of the community, is certainly a priority of ours, so much so that we think about it like, where can we layer on additional support to a specific neighborhood or an area of the community where one additional resource from us, maybe it's not necessarily one of our biggest focus or priority areas, but can address the overall ecosystem of that neighborhood. By us getting involved, we try and prioritize that. We try to look at those kind of things. I think the other area that we really want to make sure it's understood and look at is, layering support is great, getting involved and adding additional resources, but it has to still be within the core mission of what we're trying to do. And I appreciate so much of the work you guys are doing, because all too often, and I think my previously of the old Bucks organization or community partners that I've heard, it's not so much that they're thinking about always just exactly what the layering support is, or what the true impact ultimately is going to be. We oftentimes throw money at programs and this new program for this new school district or that or this. We often forget about the most basic needs that our communities are having challenges with: housing, food. And so we do look at that holistic community ecosystem, the mindset. We try to, at least. I don't know if we do a good enough job of it, but if we can get our philanthropic community to continue to think beyond just programmatic amplification or support and can remember there are nitty-gritty, huge challenges that need to be addressed before we can just put in a new STEM program or put in this new program in a school, then I think we're going to start to do a better job of really trying to tackle the challenges that are continuing to face our community. So we think about it. I think it's one of the hardest parts of what we do because there are so many good things that you can do in other programmatic investments or things like that. But we as a Bucks organization are really trying to take that step back to say, does it make more sense if we address the other more prominent challenges that allow them to ultimately benefit from programs or other stronger investments into that neighborhood?
Anything to add, Jamie? Quickly?
Yeah.
With the
really?
5 seconds we have
Yeah,
left,
got it,
we're like
great.
on radio, right? We're on with the 10 seconds left.
So as I think about how resilient communities and food insecurity go together, I think about why people are food insecure, right? People are food insecure not just because their cupboards are empty today, but it's a resource issue, right? It's a resource around education, it's a resource around healthcare, it's a resource around housing, it's also a resource around money and fair wages and all of those things. And so kind of back to my earlier comment of like, we all have to talk about food insecurity as a symptom of a larger problem, and you need to continue to push us to think about those pieces of the puzzle. And because if I'm laser focused on hunger relief, my inclination is to give to the food bank and give to a pantry. And I'm not just saying me personally, but our collective, that's our inclination. But people, why are people in a food pantry line? And I think anytime I'm given a microphone in front of food bankers, maybe this is another grenade, but I'm going to say it, I think we have to think beyond pounds and meals, and I think we have to talk about and think about how we're measuring shortening the line and getting people out of the line and not just our distributions. And I think that is when we're thinking about how we get less pounds next year and less people next year, and we think about how the community supports are creating an environment where less people are coming to us, and you're talking to funders about serving less people instead of more people, that's where the resilient communities come from.
That was less of a grenade than the first one, surprisingly.
What?
That was less of a grenade.
I used to joke being in food banking that when you went to food banking conferences, it was like a dating game to ask how many pounds you did. Like, hey, how many pounds do you do? It was like a whole thing anyway. Hopefully it's not still like that.
Check back.
Okay, cool.
So last question, and it's going to come from me, and it's really about, we want to give folks real practical tips. So we've had a really broad, wide-ranging conversation, right? Pretty high level, pretty in the cloud, head sort of in the clouds, right? So and blue sky. But very practically, like when they leave this conference or when they're connecting with folks in the breaks that we're going to go to in about 10 minutes, what are some practical things that these folks can do when they go home to, build partnerships, reach out to folks in their communities, build relationships, sort of lean into their power? Like, what are some practical things that they can do as day-to-day practitioners? Arvin.
We'll start down here. First, thank you. I appreciate you guys having me on this
Oh.
panel. I think I turned off my mic again.
Are you good?
Back on.
We got a mic coming to you.
Any better? Any
Yeah,
better?
we're good.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Patty. Thank you to the team for having me here today. Listen, for me, it always ultimately comes down to relationships. Use the time to connect with each other, learn what each other are obviously doing, steal each other's ideas. That's not a bad thing. So I would say the power ultimately comes in partnerships and collaborations, and we truly believe that. Where we can, that's where we want to support. So I encourage you to brainstorm. Think of ideas of how different parts of our state can work together. We may represent a specific region of the state or community or neighborhood, but we're all ultimately still Wisconsin. And so I ask you to think about those kind of things, and please don't hesitate to reach out. One of the biggest focus areas for the Milwaukee Bucks is trying to become more visible around the state, to support more of our communities around the state. So if you've ever thought, like, oh, they're just in Milwaukee, they're not going to come all the way up to Ashland, Wisconsin, or wherever, you're wrong. We will. And so I ask you to reach out and challenge us with that. And I ask you to think about how we can all work together. And don't lose sight of the importance of your voice. Your voice, the people that you have that aren't here today, they have incredible reach. Don't underestimate the value of that grassroots promotion and storytelling. You all in this room aren't the only ones who are passionate about the work that you do. You happen to be the leaders of your organizations representing a multitude of others who are incredibly passionate, hopefully. So empower them, give them that voice, allow them to be further advocates, but more importantly, let's come together. So.
I want to echo Arvind in saying thank you because you all help our members, our communities in so many ways. So just know that every day that we thank you, especially from United Healthcare. Having food for our members and things like that is so important. I would ask you to walk away and try and think about things differently. Don't maybe always do exactly what you've done, and think about what the problem is that you're trying to solve and what's the outcome you're trying to get at, and think about the metrics and the things that you look at in a different way. So if it's trying to get the line to be shorter, if it's trying to actually give out less food because we figured out something systematically somewhere else to help people in food insecurity, I mean, that's the ultimate goal. And so I think thinking about things differently sometimes requires you to meet somebody new. So I challenge you, meet somebody new today that you haven't talked about, bless you, that you haven't met before, that may think about things differently. Go to different sectors, study different things. I mean, think about Amazon delivering food versus you having a food distribution. Do whatever's fun and break out of your box sometimes, because I think that's when you can get creative, that's when you can get new ideas. So just spend some time, and sometimes you need to carve time out for that, because we all get so busy, and we get so busy doing what we're normally doing. So try and think about something that you're trying to solve maybe in just a little different way.
I would say first, a new corporate partner is just a Google away. Like, I would encourage you all, like the number of partnerships that I have found by literally being like, who's working on this in my community? And I would say if there's something that I'm learning now in my new space is that these young tech startup folks are coming at this issue from a very different lens. These are young people that want to disrupt, they want to change the world, but they have no idea how to do it. Great news, though, you guys know how to do it. And so if there's one thing today that I've told a few people, there is a venture capitalist in your town somewhere. That's not a bad word. Find people that are investing in these young folks and get in with them and ask them if these young folks need a mentor in hunger relief or in food insecurity or in building resilient communities. These young folks are hungry, for lack of better words, for that knowledge. And these are the folks that will be running these massive companies 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And I will also say, I was in the place of like, oh, I get it, another app, we don't care. We have too much work to do already, but don't underestimate those young leaders. Because 5 years ago, nobody thought Soylent was gonna do anything and turned us down for partnerships all the time. And those same people are now asking me for money. And so it's a really interesting place. So Google VCs in your town, reach out to young entrepreneurs, and know that in that space, you are the expert, and ask them for what you need them to do.
Thank you so much for such an incredible panel. I was just saying, I probably can do this yelling. Here we go. Just a couple housekeeping tips. We have a really tight lunch transition, so when you finish up at 12:45, or maybe hopefully a few minutes before, get in here, start eating, because we have a tight lunch program with Sarah Smarsh, our keynote speaker. Make sure you continue posting on Tahuva. We're announcing awards after lunch. Thank you. Enjoy your morning.